Well, classical music can be many things to many people, powerful, haunting, or stirring. Still, you'd rarely hear classical music described as dangerous. But for the National Youth Orchestra of Iraq, that is exactly what it is. From the daily threat of real violence to having to hide their instruments for fear of repercussions, to play classical music in Iraq is decidedly difficult. Well, young people from around the war-torn country make up the 45-person strong group that has been called the bravest orchestra in the world. That is the National Youth Orchestra of Iraq, performing alongside the German Youth Orchestra. Since 2008, the Iraq Orchestra has limited its rehearsals to just once a year because of security concerns, but they have managed to perform not only in Iraq, but internationally as well. The National Youth Orchestra of Iraq is about to begin a short tour of the UK next week, and they are led by Scottish conductor Paul MacAlindin, and he is on the line now from Edinburgh. Hello to you, Paul.
Hello, Stephen. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I want to get to this performance that you're preparing for in just a moment. But first, take me back to the creation of what's been called the bravest orchestra in the world. I understand this came out of the ambitions of one 17-year-old. Tell us about her and how the Orchestra of Iraq came to be.
The brainchild of Zuhal Sultan. She was a 17-year-old pianist in Baghdad. She was working with the Iraqi National Symphony Orchestra, which back in 2008 was still in a process of rebuilding itself after the war. And she had the idea, which required us to really consider how to excuse me, something's beeping in the background.
No trouble.
Right, I'll just take the phone over to here. She basically she created the problem. Right, I'm back up. The beeping has stopped. I'll
there we are.
Now, Stephen.
So glad to hear that.
She basically created the idea of the National Youth Orchestra of Iraq, but she went to the British Council, and they helped her to write a press release, which circulated around the whole of the UK press. Now, I picked that press release up in Edinburgh on a newspaper lying on the table next to my fish and chips and pint, and the headline was Iraqi Teen Seeks Maestro for Youth Orchestra. And through that first connection, she and I got together through Skype. I live in Cologne in Germany. And we started to really crunch the problem of how to create the National Youth Orchestra of Iraq.
It would be, I suppose, easy to see all of the impediments and all of the barriers to making this happen. How did you see what was possible here?
It's possible because of the Internet. We had to face the really difficult question of how do you audition young players who are scattered around the whole of Iraq, who don't have music lessons, who don't have teachers. How do you find out how good they are in order to put together a youth orchestra? And what we did is we put everything online. We asked them to create videos of their playing and upload them to YouTube, which is what I could see from my home in Cologne, and I could share that with other tutors and make that decision. We also worked very intensively online to project manage and to fundraise. And one of the most innovative ways in which we've closed one of our funding gaps, Zuhal twittered Baram Saleh, who was then the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq in Baghdad. There was an article of the Sunday Times in London about her and her dream, and she tweeted him the link, and 2 days later she was in his office, and he gave her $50,000.
Oh my. What was her motivation? Why was it so important for her to create this orchestra?
It was important for her to create this orchestra because as a young Iraqi in Iraq, an Arab, she was aware of the huge divides between the peoples of Iraq, particularly the Kurds and the Arabs. And she has many friends around the whole country who play isolatedly classical music instruments. She also wanted these friends to have decent lessons and to come together to get to know each other on a cultural level, and also to get to have contact with good teachers, which I and my colleagues flew in to do.
Tell me about some of the challenges of a young person trying to play classical music, Western classical music in Iraq. Where do they begin?
They begin by finding some kind of instrument. There are institutes of fine arts around the whole of Iraq. These don't have tremendous amounts of teaching resource, and some don't have any. They may have very poor quality instruments, or a shortage of some and a surplus of others. So some people are given an instrument to try out without really having the choice as to what kind of instrument suits them. Others are connected more closely to the Iraqi National Symphony Orchestra in Baghdad, and they through friends, through players and teachers, may find their way to a bassoon or an oboe or another instrument that is really, really rare in Iraq to find.
But I guess just the idea of playing Western classical music, I mean, is this something that typically an Iraqi might try to instill in their children, or is it a certain class of people we're talking about?
Yes, it's a good question. It's not something that many people, many families in Iraq do try to instill in their children, but some families, particularly in the Kurdish region of Iraq, are very musical and have a long tradition of making folk music and do try to do their best. Some families connected to organizations like the Iraqi National Symphony Orchestra will try to support their kids to learn a classical music instrument. But generally speaking, it's frowned upon. Overall, it's not a terribly musically supportive culture, even though it's a musically rich culture. And so I would say that there are quite a few barriers. In my orchestra, there are people from very wealthy backgrounds and people from very poor backgrounds who just by chance of getting hold of an instrument and working out the fingering by downloading it through the internet and coaching themselves on YouTube have learned how to play it.
Really? So many of them are self-taught?
Many of them are by due to the fact that the war has pushed a lot of teaching talent out of Iraq. Self-taught, yes. There's a lot of internet resource one can download, but it's not the same as a one-to-one teacher, and that's really what the National Youth Orchestra of Iraq tries to provide.
So then for these young people who would like to play and like to eventually, I suppose, perform this music, what is daily life like? I mean, how do they manage to practice what they do?
It depends on which district and area of Iraq they're in. If we take Baghdad, some areas of Baghdad are perfectly okay if you stay at home and practice and the music gets heard outside your home by your neighbors. Other areas like Sadr City, for example, which are much more under fundamentalist control, will create a lot of problems for you if you're heard practicing a Western classical instrument. And for your family as well. This is very much a family-oriented culture, and you can get your whole family in trouble if you upset the traditional expectations of your neighbors.
What sort of trouble are you talking about?
You could be driven out. You could be ostracized. You could be seen as supporting Western culture. And there have been reports, particularly back in 2004 and 2005, of musicians or people running music shops in Baghdad being executed, the shops being torched down. These are very, very extreme examples, and the musicians that I work with nowadays tell me that the situation is remarkably better than it used to be.
It sounds, though, like a terrible risk that people would take.
It's a terrible risk carrying an instrument case down the street. It used to be the case that you were stopped at checkpoints to see if there was a bomb or a weapon in your violin case. And there's another problem if it's a Western classical instrument, because these instrument cases look strange, then it's as if you will be representative of a culture that some people see as threatening, particularly after an invasion. So there is an element of risk. People have to wrap their instruments in brown paper bags or carry them in plastic bags to disguise the shape in order to get to rehearsal.
Well, tell me about rehearsals. Where would those take place, and how would that work?
Rehearsals in the Iraqi National Symphony Orchestra take place in their particular center in a safer part of Baghdad. Our rehearsals with the National Youth Orchestra of Iraq are in either Suleimania or Erbil, which are the two main Kurdistan region cities in Iraq in the north. The Kurdistan regional government has made their region very, very much more secure than in Baghdad, and this allows us to be able to rehearse in relative safety.
So when you were putting all of this together, then you were able to audition most or all of the musicians online?
Absolutely all of them. Some of them, because the internet back in 2008-9 was a very basic and unpredictable infrastructure, would require 7 to 10 hours to upload 5 minutes of music, and then you'd better hope that there wouldn't be a power cut to cut the download, the upload. But if they couldn't get the videos to me by YouTube, then they simply posted them out to me by courier, and that either way worked.
And tell me about when the orchestra came together then for the first time.
Back in 2009 in Sulaymaniyah, we all arrived cold to the Palace of Arts. Very many of us didn't know each other. We had perhaps chatted or contacted each other through the internet, but this was the first meeting of Kurds and Arabs who played classical music and this Western team of conductors. And we didn't know how to achieve what we were going to achieve. We had Haydn 99 and Beethoven's Prometheus Overture in the program, as well as some Kurdish and Arab music. And basically we just hunkered down and worked very hard to try and get the rehearsals to a point where they could sound at least decent. And it was that very intense youth orchestra process, the environment, which really fused us together as a team. I remember in the first week there was the Kurdistan table, the Arab table, and the English-speaking tutors table at mealtimes. And it was so divided, it was unbelievable. But as soon as we started partying, as soon as we started letting our hair down and just having as much fun as the hard work we were doing, creating a work hard, play hard culture, then that kind of broke the ice, and people decided to just get on with putting together as good a concert as they could.
You've said that it was difficult even to get some of the players to play their instruments at full volume since they were so used to muting them to practice.
That's correct. Their physiologies have been constricted at home by the risk of playing too loud and being discovered. And so, yes, Ali, our horn player, has to shove a towel into his horn, and he plays in practices permanently muted. And this restricts their airflow. It means that when they come here to the National Youth Orchestra of Iraq, we have to do what we can to retrain their diaphragms, their physiology, to be able to make a bigger, fuller, more confident sound. Now, we can't change that physiology in 2 weeks of rehearsal, but we can give them the advice and the tools to be able to develop themselves afterwards.
And Paul, why did the members of the orchestra tell you about why they do it? I mean, what makes it worth it to them to take this kind of risk?
They do it because, to be honest with you, I think most of them play classical music because it's the way of shutting out the chaos and the violence around them. I can't, as a Westerner, get to the heart of the question of why a young Arab or Kurd would find their way to an instrument and then try to use the internet to work out how to play it, and then spend so much time alone, out of contact with other musicians, just making music and playing whatever they can download offline. I don't understand that because I'm a Westerner, but I know from speaking to them that a very important part of the function of making music for them is to shut out the reality around them and to get them through another day. It's also worth saying it's not unuseful to play a classical music instrument when you've only got 4 hours of electricity a day and regular power cuts. There's nothing to plug in.
Now, I imagine that a trip like this to the UK, this has got to be hugely significant to all of these young people.
It is vastly significant. From my perspective, it means getting them into a completely safe and well-organized environment, free from any interference or chaos, so that we can be a normal youth orchestra. That means more to me than anything else. To them, it means meeting players from our partner, our collaborative youth orchestra, the Edinburgh Youth Orchestra, and just discovering from them how other youth orchestras work, what their expectations are, their dreams, their friendships, their love of music, where that comes from. And from the point of view of being here in summer in Edinburgh, which at the best of times isn't the warmest and driest of places, it's a huge contrast from the 60 degrees that they have to get through in Baghdad every day.
And for this UK debut, you've teamed up with world-renowned British cellist Julian Lloyd. What has his relationship been to the young musicians?
Well, Julian Lloyd Webber and I attempted to try and get the orchestra to Britain back in 2010. This was a really hard-worked project that we tried to pull off, and we didn't in that year. So he's always been supportive and always wanted to see this happen right from the start of this particular visit's beginning. So basically, thanks to the Scottish government giving us £100,000 from a fine to do with a company who'd been bribing Saddam Hussein in the 1990s, they were able to support us and give us the financial base to come here, and that was a green light for all these people who I'd worked with in 2010 to get back on board. And Julian runs El Sistema-style music education projects in England, so his heart is as much to do with radical forms of education as it is to do with performing on the international concert circuit. So he gets what the National Youth Orchestra is about in a very fundamental way, and we're just thrilled to have him on board again.
You sped through that a little bit. The funding for this comes from a company that was fined because it violated sanctions against Iraq?
That's correct. And this company was taken to court by the Scottish government in Scotland and fined £15.3 million. We got some of that because as soon as I heard about that, a friend of mine phoned me, and I got straight onto the Scottish government and went through their telephone system in about 10 minutes till I got somebody who knew what I was talking about and said, "What are you doing for the people of Iraq with that money?" And from that point on, we started a conversation which secured the funding that we now enjoy.
Do you think that this orchestra will be part of a change in the overall culture in Iraq? Is this a step?
This is a step, but it's a very important point to make that it's not because of the orchestra itself that the culture is changing. It's because of what the players do afterwards when they go back to Iraq. So some of them will go back to Iraq and they will teach kids, but they'll teach them in a better way because they've had experience of being taught well themselves now. Others will set up string quartets. Others will set up wind duos. Others will set up chamber orchestras. Our principal flautist in Kirkuk has set up his own chamber orchestra and is conducting that now. So these are projects that, with a little bit of hope and a little bit of expertise from us, they just go away and start up from nothing. And that's the most inspiring part of this whole project. And
do you expect that sometime soon the orchestra will be able to, for example, play a show in Baghdad, or are we still a very long way from seeing that?
That's a really good question, and I don't have the answer to it. I hope that one day we shall get to Baghdad. There are a whole pile of logistical and security reasons why we can't yet. And once these are surmounted, we will, because it's my personal vision that the orchestra play in the capital. That goes without saying.
Paul MacAlindin, such a pleasure to speak with you today. We appreciate your time and good luck with it.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
I've been speaking with Paul MacAlindin, conductor of Iraq's National Youth Orchestra. The orchestra will make its UK debut in Scotland in a few days' time. Paul MacAlindin joined us on the line from Edinburgh.